Survivors of the Hillsborough disaster have told Newsnight they were intimidated and threatened by police sent to take their statements. 18 months ago, the Hillsborough Independent Panel reported that accounts from South Yorkshire Police, the local force, had been changed, apparently to shift the blame onto the fans. But for the first time, a number of fans who survived the disaster have come forward to tell us how West Midlands Police took their statements. Peter Marshall, who was at Hillsborough in 1989, has been investigating.
If you were there, you know. If you were on the terrace inside, 3,000 were packed behind the goal, you thank mercy you survived. 96 didn't. But for untold numbers, escaping the crush was only the start of decades of trauma.
I wasn't the same person. The top had come off for me and I couldn't keep it all within anymore. And I just didn't want to carry on.
Some feel their trauma was made far worse by the attitude of the officers whose job it was to mount an independent investigation into what went wrong at Hillsborough. Survivors will tell you that certain of these officers from the West Midlands force seem to regard them not so much as vulnerable but invaluable witnesses, more as though they were the accused.
He told me he was going to put together a case to charge me with wasting police time. I'm a 19-year-old boy, 3 weeks out of Hillsborough, traumatised, and he's threatening me that he's going to put together a case for wasting police time because he didn't like my evidence.
Nick, a 19-year-old Sheffield student at the time, was an Ipswich fan and neutral, excited to be going to a cup semi-final with friends from Liverpool. But as soon as he arrived outside the ground, he saw the chaos.
There was a very dangerous crush outside the stadium which developed. There were very few police around, no directions, no filtering, no barriers, nothing at all.
Nick and over 1,000 others went into the ground when police ordered the opening of an exit gate. Within seconds they were in a lethal crush on the terrace. John was just 17.
The sound that still resonates with me to this day is the sound of a crash barrier just snapping. And everyone seemed just to topple in a domino effect. And I went down, under and through the crowd. I think I passed out underneath and within the crowd and came to, miraculously, near the front left of the pen, and came to amongst people that I now know were dead or were dying.
My luck is in landing a matter of metres away from a gate that leads onto the pitch. There was a policeman on the gate. Literally, the cries are simple cries, you know. People are dying. The guy turns his back on us, ignores us.
So he just didn't comprehend what was going on in front of his eyes?
He could not have understood it.
I remember standing next to a guy with dark, greasy hair, obviously from the sweat. We were totally pushed against each other in such a way that it's impossible to describe. It was just me and him fighting for our lives. And I don't know if he was one of the 96. I don't know if he got out. But I know that I had to stand on him to get out.
John helped carry the dead and dying and then collapsed. In the following weeks, he and Nick Brayley and others were asked to make statements to the West Midlands Police, who'd been called in to investigate. The questions weren't what they'd expected.
The questions along the line of, you know, how can you give evidence against a policeman? How can you make statements like that? Who are you to try and stitch us up and all this nonsense? He then turned quite aggressive and started to question me. Was I a left-wing agitator? Was I a student agitator? Was I a member of the Socialist Workers' Party? It was observed that the day before I had been wearing a Free Mandela t-shirt, and that apparently that made me a left-wing agitator.
What did you say to this?
I kind of laughed initially, but it's like, you know, are you serious? I'm just a fan of the game of football.
John, the schoolboy, says 2 officers came to his house and sent his parents away, supposedly to spare their feelings. He told them everything, including his plan to join the police. He says they dismissed his account as unimportant. They'd heard it all before.
Or I hadn't told them anything they didn't already know. And although I'd been talking, I didn't know what he'd written. And they stood around me. I remember standing up because I wasn't happy, and I went to speak to him. I said, I want to read it. And the pair of them stood around me. And now I know that that was oppressive behaviour, because they were physically intimidating. 2 grown men, detectives, in my house. I felt I had no power to tell them what to do.
You were a child?
Yeah. And they simply told me to sign it. They said, you don't need to read it. I've written what you've told me. All you need to do is sign this now.
So what happened?
Signed it.
You didn't read it?
No, they wouldn't let me.
Nick Braley says to him the police became increasingly hostile.
He then turned on me as to whether I was a criminal with a grudge against the police. He told me he was going to check my criminal record. He just said I wasn't there. I couldn't have been there.
Couldn't have been at the game?
Yeah, and I'm like, well, you got my match ticket. What more do you need for me to prove I was there? He said, well, you could have found that.
What's particularly troubling is that these stories of survivors feeling intimidated and abused are not uncommon. Many now see a thread stretching from the South Yorkshire force, who bungled the organisation at Hillsborough, to the West Midlands police, now deemed to have failed in their investigation. As main author of the Hillsborough Panel report, and after 25 years researching the disaster, Professor Phil Scraton believes survivors, like the bereaved, weren't interviewed, they were interrogated.
There was a mindset amongst the police investigators, and that mindset hinged on crowd-related violence, hooliganism, for want of a better phrase, drunkenness, late arrival, and ticketlessness. That was the mindset. What I think is so significant about this is that if you put that alongside knowledge that the police statements were being reviewed and altered, it brings into question the entire evidential base upon which the inquiries and investigations were conducted.
Phil Scraton says the way statements were taken only added to the unresolved trauma. John was both typical and unique. He joined the police, the Met's murder squad, but was haunted by what he calls survivor guilt. 15 years on, he tried to kill himself.
The sounds of the barrier, the screams, and still the feel of that guy's hair in my face. Still feel it. I feel it now, feel it today. And I didn't want it anymore. I didn't think I deserved to still be around.
So what did you do?
I tried to drive a car into a tree.
John resigned from the police and has now rebuilt his life. At the Warrington headquarters of the Independent Police Complaints Commission, they're re-interviewing survivors. After nearly a quarter of a century, all the original statements were handed to the Hillsborough panel and are stored here. Nick Braley's seen his and says it doesn't reflect the truth. He's also seen internal West Midlands police memos and notes. And there, handwritten, are the lines referring to him. Came across as totally anti-police. At first doubted had been at the match. And then there's his Nelson Mandela t-shirt. Left-wing type, actual motif, not known.
What do you think of it? What they've written down?
Well, I just think it's nonsense. It's just it's just a cover-up of a cover-up, if you like.
John's finally got to see the statement he was refused sight of 25 years ago. He says it even places him in the wrong part of the ground.
The way they dealt with me on that day, I felt dirty when they walked out the door. I felt that they didn't want to listen to me and they'd come with an agenda, and it totally vindicates my thoughts then.
West Midlands Police aren't commenting on any of this. They say they're awaiting the completion of continuing investigations and the fresh Hillsborough inquests.